welcome back, everybody. It's the segment I've been teasing for the entire show. And joining me is someone who might look somewhat familiar to you, and it's Ian. Ian Fisher, who hosts the show when I'm not here. Well, he shares hosting duties when I'm not here with Sally Ganga. Ian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show as a guest, as opposed to as a host. This is great.
It is great.
Yeah, I'm excited for us to have another conversation that hopefully everybody will enjoy.
Absolutely. And I should add that you are obviously a colleague, but also former admissions officer at Reed College. Right. We don't typically lead with our experience, so people may not remember that about you, but you are a former admissions officer. So
that's right.
All right. So I have been teasing this all episode, and what I've been saying is, do colleges care about community service? And I said that I thought people would be surprised by my answer. But why don't you give me your answer? Do colleges care
about community service?
Yes.
I think the answer is that the community service doesn't fall into a special category in the application process, whereby students need to have it in order to be admissible to any given school. And so I wrote a blog post a while ago that the headline was "Colleges Don't Care About Community Service." And I think that was sort of precipitated by this idea that so many families were coming to us and saying, so here are his grades, here are his courses, and here's his volunteer work, as though that was necessary. Now, right. We know that, grades and courses are necessary in order to apply for traditional colleges, but community service is not in that same kind of category. And so it was a little bit of an enticing headline that we put on that blog post.
If you will.
Yeah, I mean, it worked. A lot of people read it and I think got the message from that. But yeah, I think it's important to have this conversation so that families can understand a little bit better.
Right. I think my short answer to that question is always no. Do colleges care about community service? No. And the reason
like to keep it simple. Yeah.
I like to keep it simple. The reason I say no is because it's not a bad thing to do community service, but it's exactly what you just shared. It is not an expectation. So if you didn't do community service, it's not like your application will be lacking. If you do it, it's not like your application has something extra special. It is one thing that students can choose to do outside of the classroom. If you do it, that can be great. If you don't do it, not a problem, right? So that's why I say no.
Yeah, and so like to me, it's as silly as somebody saying, colleges are really interested in tuba players, and so you need to play the tuba if you want to get into college. That's a type of activity. It's a way of being involved within your community, and community service is another type of activity. But I encourage families to think about what the personalities and dispositions are of their students and their interests in order to determine whether service is something that has a really big role for them in their extracurricular profile.
Right. And I think the other challenge is with this vision that community service is this, you have to do it, is that then leads to many students writing about it because they think colleges really care about it. So what's your take on the community service essay?
I don't ever want to say that a topic for an essay is totally off limits, because I think that there is a way to write a great essay for all kinds of different topics. In fact, I had a student last year that wrote a great essay that started with a service trip to another country. Now, that's not what it was about, but that was a part of what led towards the main idea that he was creating for his essay. But I think that the issue that I see with students is that when we start brainstorming essays, they put themselves in a box from the start in saying, I have to write about this because this is the thing that colleges want to hear about. And Beth, I was talking to a young woman just a couple of days ago, and I asked her, what are you known for? Like, what are you really good at? And she's just like, well, I do a lot of volunteer work. And I felt in that answer that she was trying to answer in a way that she thought I wanted to hear.
Right.
And so I said, let's take that apart. Like, what do your friends think of you? Like, what kind of role do you play within your friend group? What's your relationship with your friends? She's like, well, I'm kind of the mom of the group. I'm always prepared for different things. I look out for everybody. I was like, this is your essay. We got to find a way to make this your essay, not this volunteer piece. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And yet I'm sure you've had the experience, as have I, where community service really is integral to a student's identity.
Can be. Yeah.
It's what they do with their time, and they can talk about it in interesting and exciting ways. They get a lot out of it. They're accomplishing a lot, but personally, it's very gratifying to them. And
Right.
that's a great example of how that could be a really great essay to, or a topic to write about for that student, but it should never be the default choice. And
Right.
I like the way that you're saying it. They put themselves in a box. Don't do that, right? Be more open. Don't put yourself in the box. You can't write about this, but also don't put yourself in the box that I should write about this because I think this is what colleges want to hear about.
I think the other thing about service essays is that, what we often focus on when we talk to students after their first drafts, or even in the brainstorming process, is what's the takeaway here? Like what's the growth that you've experienced? What's the realization you've had about yourself? And I think through service, we can have some really great realizations, but they're not usually unusual. They're not uncommon, right? So we might have some kind of reflection that comes from serving others, but a lot of people get that same kind of feeling when they have that kind of activity. And so if you're writing an essay that talks about that revelation that you had, while it can be deeply personal, it doesn't help to differentiate you within an applicant pool. And it's not particularly profound. And so we want to look for places where you're actually painting a better picture of who you are as a different kind of student from other applicants.
Right. Okay. Let's shift slightly here.
Let's do it.
We have students who do want to do community service, or perhaps they need to because it's part of their high school's requirements, or perhaps as a parent, you feel that it's really important your student do community service. I do want to be clear that neither Ian nor I are saying community service is bad. Community service. Right?
I think it's great. It's great.
Yeah. And that you shouldn't do it. We're not saying that. But I would love to get your thoughts, Ian, on what are some of the ways in which you've seen students or that you encourage community service involvement that you think can be particularly valuable?
Yeah, I was just talking to a student yesterday, actually, and I think you and I were going back and forth about this radio show, and I happened to meet with one of my students, and this subject of community service came up in exactly this form. And what we were talking about was he's a student that has long had an interest in reading. He likes spending time at the library. He enjoys exploring books. And so we started talking about not necessarily leading with, well, what kind of service can you do? But how can you get involved in your community that allows you to both explore this passion that you have for the library or for books, and also make connections and make a difference within your community. And so we started more with what the interest is, and then look for ways to express that interest. Because I think what's really interesting from an admission standpoint is I'm not counting up hours when I'm looking at an activities list for a student. I'm like, how are you actually spending your time here? And for a kid that spends a ton of time at the library, I'm like, this is a reader. This is somebody who's like plugged in. Like this is part of that identity. And that's what service I think can often show is what your priorities are, what your interests are, because that's where you're choosing to spend your time.
Right. And for a student who's trying to build a profile that really shows who they are, better to do service in an area, like you say, where you're expressing more about an interest than just, well, I'm going to do community service, so I'm going to go down to the soup kitchen and I'm going to stack boxes, or I'm going to serve food. Again, those are good things to do. It's not like they lack value. It's just, it's better, arguably, to follow up on interests.
It has a lot to do with just the attitude going in, right? So is the attitude like, okay, there's a shift at the soup kitchen, it's 3 hours, so that's going to get me closer to the 30 hours that I need this year?
Yes.
Or is it, I'm really excited to go down there because I'm interested in houselessness within my community. I'm interested in helping get people resources, and I want to see how the food bank or the soup kitchen functions within my community. So I'm going to go check that out.
Right.
And I think, what's really cool about this, you can bring friends along, you can bring your family, make mom and dad come with you as a student. But when you see the student is like motivating the project, there's something that's so much more authentic to that. And that, of course, is a keyword that we bring up on almost every show.
Right. Being authentic. So let's reverse that or flip that. And what are some things that you think students might want to discount as, less valuable community service type of work?
Yeah, I think anytime you're really just focused on accumulating hours, right? So we want the hours to be a byproduct of a commitment of time. We don't want them to be the reason
Right.
for showing up and doing whatever it is that you're doing. And it's been very interesting, Beth. That I think that a lot of the community service hours that we've seen high schools require students to have in order to graduate has sort of been a response to this idea that community service is important in the college process.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now everybody in that school is doing it, right? So,
Right.
so now there's every single student that graduates from that high school has the same number minimum of community service hours. And so it's no longer a differentiator within that applicant pool. It's a really interesting solution that actually creates a different kind of problem for students.
Right.
So I think going for hours is really the wrong approach. Thinking more about that underlying activity is important. And I think that one of the ways that you can get into trouble if you're looking at hours is you're cobbling together lots of different experiences across many different organizations and opportunities. So it's like, I'll go to the soup kitchen, then I'll do some tutoring, then I'll work at the library, then I'll go plant some trees. And like, I'm putting these hours together, but how you would represent that in an application or what the story is that's included there, I think is really difficult. I think it's great to explore early on, but then you want to figure out, okay, what did I enjoy the most out of these 4 activities that I did? Which one do I want to continue to go back to?
Right.
As opposed to just grabbing piecemeal here and there and building those hours together.
Right. And also, I think one of the key things I'm hearing come from you a couple of times is just in your community.
Yeah.
Which in my mind means you're staying closer to home. What are your thoughts on projects that take you out of your community, cost your parents money? And, what do you think about those?
I mean, whenever I look at that, there's an idea that's sort of like, there are people probably 20 minutes away from where you live that could also national or to travel for some reason. It has to be there. You want to do it because there's an authentic reason for doing so, right? Like I have a friend who is super interested in setting up healthcare facilities and how different how different countries that are under resourced might set up hospitals. And so being international serves that interest because it's fulfilling that curiosity. But I think if you're just saying, well, if I go to another country, that's on its face going to be more impressive because look how much I'm committing to this effort. It's not really perceived in that way. And I think that there is something even that could potentially be problematic about showing up for 2 weeks to help do something and then leaving. Whereas this sustained commitment that you can give to a community that you live in for years can make much more of an impact long-term.
Right. And I agree with you on the whole, like there are reasons that you might go abroad to do some community service. And I think you highlighted a couple, but you could do more good closer to home. And I also think that's something that feels a little questionable about paying a lot of money and going is it basically you're really doing nothing other than showing up and doing what they tell you to do. So it's a nice little way to give back that's all wrapped up in a bow. And here you go. You're going to go on this trip. You're going to get your hours and you're going to do some good. It isn't that you're not doing good. It's that it requires very little of the student other than your parents typically opening up their checkbook, which is a really antiquated way to think about it. But other than your parents shooting a Venmo somewhere, right? Or giving their credit card. And the other types of involvement speak more to that student engagement. Like you said, the student kind of being the ringleader, the student driving the process a little bit more. So, yeah.
And we can imagine circumstances where a student does some fundraising and is able to fund, a trip where they're going somewhere because they have that particular interest. But I think that there's a lot of sort of antecedent research and understanding that comes from that. And I think that where students can get into trouble is, they're coming up on a summer, they're trying to think about what it is that they want to do. And they say, well, maybe I'll go somewhere and do some community service. And for me, that's the wrong approach. Go down the street and do some community service if that's the thing that you are really excited about doing. There isn't any special benefit to going abroad to do this unless it fulfills that interest.
Right, exactly. What else? We've seen some things about, some schools will give community service awards out. Sometimes I think those things will be based on you have a student who's really super active in community service, and sometimes it's around other things. I think there's a presidential service award. When you saw that on an application, did that make you say, wow, that's impressive? Talk to us a little about the awards piece of community service.
Yeah, so I think there are different kinds of awards, and let's just draw an analogy between an academic award and then the service award. So in your school, you can win the English Student of the Year award, which is a big deal, right? The department chooses the best student within all the English classes at your grade level. That's a big deal, and there are probably some subjective elements to that as well as objective measures. Then there's also the honor roll. So in order to hit the honor roll, you have to have above a certain GPA. Right. And so if you are on the honor roll and you tell me that as a college admission officer, but I have your grades in front of me, all that tells me is that the honor roll requires that you have at least these grades, right? It's telling me more about your school system than it's telling me anything about you. And so the Presidential Service Award has these criteria that say, if you hit a certain number of hours in a calendar year, you qualify for the bronze, silver, or gold award.
Right.
But your activities list already tells me what service you've done and how many hours you've committed to those. So adding on top of that you've got the gold award is in many ways redundant.
Right.
And so I think students that are striving for this, it could be nice to win that award to get some recognition. I think it's good to set goals, but I wouldn't let that hourly commitment take away from, again, that authentic interest that we're pointing to. We're not aiming for redundant measures of our success. We're really looking for that authenticity.
Right. And we're not, and I think what you and I talked about yesterday was it doesn't matter so much the number of hours. It's really more about the activity behind the hours. And I think that's key. Ian, thank you so much for joining today as a guest. Appreciate it.
This was great. Let's do this more. I mean, we have to have other people on the show. Right?
We do.
Just be us. Okay.
Can't just be us. However, that said, next week you are back. You are hosting, and you're going to be going over fall timeline for seniors from both an admissions and a college finance perspective, and also talking about how to use, if you have Naviance as part of your school offerings, how to make that an asset and use it as part of your college process. Cool. I did mention earlier in the show, please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts for us. The more we get, the easier it is for others to find us. We would, of course, love it if you give us a 5-star review. If you think this is helpful, please give us the 5 stars. We would really appreciate it. If you have questions, we do our listener Q&As pretty frequently. You can email us, gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. That's gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. And don't forget, we are here every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific. Have a good day.